12-year-old Emma sat on the old wooden porch with her Uncle Thomas. Watching fireflies dance in the summer evening, the small English village round them was quiet, with only the distant sound of sheep in the nearby fields. Uncle Thomas was her favourite relative, a quiet man with kind eyes who taught at the local primary school where everyone knew his name. Emma loved these summer visits to Uncle Thomas's cottage. The house smelled like old books and tea, and her uncle always had time to listen to her stories about school and friends. Tonight felt different, though. Uncle Thomas seemed distant, staring at the fireflies with a sadness she had never seen before. "Emma," he said softly, his voice barely louder than the evening breeze, "I want to tell you something I've never told anyone before." Emma moved closer on the wooden bench. Sensing the importance of this moment, she could feel her heart beating faster. Uncle Thomas had always been the one person in her family who never seemed to carry heavy burdens. He was gentle and calm, always ready with a smile or a funny story. But tonight, something was different. Uncle Thomas looked down at his weathered hands that had graded thousands of papers and helped countless children learn to read. 20 years ago, I was accepted to study engineering at Cambridge University. It was my dream, everything I had worked for since I was your age. Emma's eyes widened. She had never known this about her uncle. He had always just been the village teacher, someone who belonged in this small place as naturally as the old oak tree in his garden. His voice trembled slightly as he continued. "I studied so hard in school, every night. I would sit at my desk and imagine myself building bridges and designing buildings. I wanted to create things that would last forever, things that would help people." A firefly landed on the porch railing, glowing softly in the growing darkness. Uncle Thomas watched it with gentle eyes, but when the time came to leave for university, I was too afraid. My parents were getting older, and I thought they needed me here. My mother had been sick that winter, and my father was struggling to manage our small farm alone. Emma listened carefully, trying to imagine her uncle as a young man facing such a difficult choice. The letter from Cambridge came on a Tuesday morning in spring. I remember every detail, the thick cream paper, the official seal, the words that should have filled me with joy, but instead, I felt terrified. Uncle Thomas paused, his voice growing quieter. "So I gave up my place at university. I told everyone I had changed my mind, that I wanted to stay and help the local community. But the truth was, I was scared of leaving everything familiar behind." Emma reached for his hand. It felt warm and rough from years of gardening and fixing things round the cottage. "What happened then, Uncle Thomas?" The question hung in the air between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Uncle Thomas squeezed her small hand gently. "My parents passed away just 2 years later," he whispered, and Emma could hear the pain that 20 years had not healed. "First my mother, then my father 6 months after. They had been ready to see me follow my dreams. They had even saved money to help me through university. I found the money hidden in an old tin box after the funeral." The evening air grew quiet except for the gentle chirping of crickets in the tall grass round the cottage. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 8 times. "And I realized I had thrown away my dreams for nothing," Uncle Thomas continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had been so afraid of leaving them that I never asked what they really wanted from me. They wanted me to be happy, to use my gifts, to see the world beyond this village." Emma felt tears starting in her eyes. She had never seen her uncle cry before, but she could see the wetness on his cheeks in the soft light from the cottage window. "I've carried that regret ever since, wondering what my life could have been. Every day, when I teach the children about science and mathematics, I think about the laboratories I might have worked in, the projects I might have been part of. I wonder if I could have made a real difference in the world. Emma squeezed her uncle's hand tighter. She wanted to tell him that he did make a difference, that every child in the village loved him, that he was the kindest person she knew. But she sensed that this was his moment to share, and her moment to listen. The fireflies continued their silent dance round the porch, and Emma felt the weight of her uncle's secret settling between them. It was heavy and sad, but somehow it also felt like a bridge connecting their hearts. For the first time, Emma understood that grown-ups carried invisible burdens. Dreams that had been put away like old photographs in dusty boxes. She stayed close to her uncle as the evening grew darker, both of them watching the fireflies and sharing the silence that sometimes says more than words ever could. The next morning, Emma woke to the smell of fresh bread and tea drifting through Uncle Thomas's cottage. She found him in the kitchen, buttering toast with slow, careful movements. His eyes looked tired, as if he had not slept well after sharing his secret the night before. "Good morning, Uncle Thomas," Emma said softly, not wanting to break the quiet mood that still hung between them from their conversation on the porch. "Good morning, dear one," he replied, his voice gentle but distant. "I thought we might walk to the school together today. There are more things I need to tell you about that time in my life." After breakfast, they stepped out into the bright summer morning. The village was waking up round them. Mrs. Henderson was hanging laundry in her garden, and Mr. Davies was opening his small grocery shop on the corner. Everyone they passed smiled and waved at Uncle Thomas, calling out warm greetings. As they walked down the cobblestone street, Uncle Thomas began to speak again. "After I gave up university, everything changed in ways I had never expected," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years that had passed too slowly. "The decision I made affected more people than just me." Emma walked beside him, her shorter steps matching his pace perfectly. She had always loved these walks through the village. But today everything felt different. She was seeing her uncle's world through new eyes. "Your father, my younger brother William, had dreams too," Uncle Thomas continued. "We had planned to work together, to turn our family's small corner shop into something bigger. William had ideas about expanding, maybe opening a second location in the next town over." Emma had never known this about her father. She only remembered him as a busy man who worked long hours at the family business, always tired but always kind. "But when I stayed behind and became so lost in my own disappointment, William had to take over everything by himself. He worked twice as hard because I wasn't there to help him build something bigger. I was too wrapped up in my own sadness to be the partner he needed." They passed the old stone church where Emma's grandparents were buried. Uncle Thomas glanced at the cemetery gate, but kept walking. "I became bitter, Emma," he said, and she could hear the shame in his voice. "I pushed away friends who tried to help me see that life was still worth living. When people offered me job opportunities in other towns, better teaching positions with more money, I turned them all down because I felt I didn't deserve better than what I had." Emma listened carefully, beginning to understand the family dynamics she had never questioned before. She had always wondered why her father seemed to carry so much responsibility, why he looked so tired at family gatherings, why Uncle Thomas lived alone in his small cottage. Uncle Thomas stopped walking suddenly and pointed to a small cottage with a beautiful garden full of roses and lavender. The windows had bright blue shutters, and there were flower boxes beneath each one. "See that house?" he said quietly. "A wonderful woman named Margaret lived there. She was a teacher, too, at the girls' school on the other side of the village. She was smart and funny, and she had the most beautiful laugh." Emma could hear something different in her uncle's voice when he spoke about Margaret. a softness that made her pay closer attention. Margaret and I would meet at the village library on Saturday afternoons. We would talk about books and teaching, about the children we were trying to help learn and grow. She understood my love for mathematics and science. She even encouraged me to apply for better teaching positions in larger towns. Uncle Thomas's pace had slowed, and Emma could see him looking at the cottage with eyes full of old memories. She cared for me. Emma really cared, not just as a friend, but as someone she might want to build her life with. She was patient with my moods and gentle with my fears. She saw good things in me that I had stopped seeing in myself. Emma felt her heart breaking a little for her uncle. What happened to her, Uncle Thomas? I pushed her way. He said simply, his voice barely above a whisper, every time she tried to get close, every time she suggested we might have a future together, I found ways to create distance. I told myself I was protecting her from my disappointment. But really, I was just afraid of letting anyone see how much of a failure I believed myself to be. They had reached the village school now, and Emma could see children arriving with their book bags and lunch boxes. The moment they spotted Uncle Thomas, their faces lit up with genuine joy. Several of them ran over to hug him, chattering excitedly about something they had learned the day before. Mr. Thomas. Mr. Thomas, I solved that puzzle you gave us. Called out a boy with freckles and a gap-toothed grin. I brought you a drawing of my cat. Added a little girl with pigtails, holding up a colorful picture. Emma watched her uncle's face transform as he greeted each child. The sadness lifted, replaced by something warm and real. These children loved him completely, and she could see that he loved them back just as much. After the children had gone inside, Uncle Thomas turned to Emma with tired eyes. I convinced myself that staying in this village was my punishment. He continued quietly. I built walls round my heart and told myself I was protecting others from my disappointment. But really, I was just hiding from life itself. Emma watched her uncle with completely new eyes, seeing both his deep pain and the love that surrounded him everywhere they went. While Uncle Thomas was downstairs preparing tea, Emma decided to help clean his study. The small room was filled with books stacked on every surface, papers scattered across his desk, and dust dancing in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the window. Emma loved her uncle's study. It smelled like old paper and ink. And there were interesting things everywhere. A collection of smooth stones from the village stream. Reed flowers pressed between glass, and photographs of his students from years past. She had always been curious about the old wooden trunk in the corner, covered with a faded blanket. Today, something made her pull the blanket away and lift the heavy lid. What she found inside took her breath away. The trunk was filled with dozens of notebooks, all in different colors and sizes. Some were thick and leather-bound. Others were simple school notebooks with worn covers. There were loose papers covered with drawings and diagrams, tied bundles of letters, and folders stuffed with what looked like official documents. Uncle Thomas, she called excitedly, her voice carrying down the stairs. What are all these? She heard his footsteps on the creaky stairs, faster than usual. When Uncle Thomas appeared in the doorway of his study, he found Emma sitting on the floor, surrounded by notebooks, sketches, and letters spread out like treasures from a pirate's chest. His face went completely pale, as if he had seen a ghost. Emma, he said quietly, you shouldn't be looking through those things. But Emma was too excited to stop. She opened one notebook and began reading aloud in her clear, young voice. New method for teaching mathematics using everyday objects like buttons, stones, and kitchen spoons. Children learn faster when they can touch and move the numbers instead of just seeing them on paper. She grabbed another notebook, this one filled with detailed drawings. Design for a rainwater collection system for village gardens, simple wooden. Gutters can direct roof water into barrels, helping families grow vegetables during dry months. Uncle Thomas stood frozen in the doorway, watching his private thoughts being discovered by his young niece. Emma picked up a third notebook. This, one newer than the others, plans for converting old barn into community library. The building has good bones and large windows. Could house over 2,000 books and provide quiet study space for village children. You've been inventing and creating all these years, Emma exclaimed, looking up at her uncle with wide, amazed eyes. Uncle Thomas, these ideas are wonderful. Uncle Thomas walked slowly into the room and sat down heavily in his old armchair, the one with the worn velvet arms where he graded papers. Every evening, those are just silly ideas, Emma. Nothing important. Just ways I pass the time when I can't sleep at night. But Emma was not listening to his dismissive words. She kept reading, diving deeper into the trunk like an explorer who had found buried treasure. She pulled out a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. "Look at this," she said, unfolding one of the letters carefully. "Dear Mr. Thomas, I wanted you to know that I became a teacher because of you. The way you made learning feel like an adventure changed my whole life. I use your methods with my own students now. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." She grabbed another letter. "Mr. Thomas, your idea about teaching science through gardening has helped my daughter understand nature in ways I never could have imagined. She talks about photosynthesis like it's magic, and now she wants to become a botanist." Uncle Thomas was staring at Emma as if she was speaking a foreign language. He had forgotten these letters existed, had pushed them away like everything else that might suggest his life had value. Emma found a folder filled with official-looking certificates and documents. "Uncle Thomas, look. These are from the village council. Recognition for outstanding environmental education program. And this one is from last year. Certificate of appreciation for innovative water conservation. Project that helped 12 families during the drought." Her voice grew more excited as she discovered more treasures. "And here's a letter from the County Education Board, praising your innovative teaching methods. They want to study what you do and share it with other schools." Uncle Thomas felt like he was seeing his life through a kaleidoscope that had suddenly been turned, showing him patterns and colors he had never noticed before. Emma set down the papers and looked directly at her uncle with the clear, honest gaze that only children possess. "Uncle Thomas," she said gently, her voice carrying a wisdom that seemed too old for her 12 years. "You haven't wasted your life. Look at all this. You've been helping people in ways you never even realized." She gestured to all the notebooks and letters spread around them on the study floor. "These aren't silly ideas. These are the thoughts of someone who cares deeply about making the world better. These letters are from people whose lives you changed. These certificates show that important people notice your work for the first time in 20 years. Uncle Thomas allowed himself to really look at what he had created instead of what he had lost. He saw his careful handwriting documenting years of creative thinking. He saw evidence of students he had inspired and projects that had helped his community. He saw proof that his quiet life had sent ripples of goodness out into the world in ways he had never recognized. Tears filled his eyes as he began to see his life through Emma's young, clear vision, not as a story of failure and regret, but as a story of quiet service and hidden contributions. "Maybe," he whispered, his voice trembling with something that might have been hope, "maybe I've been looking at my story all wrong." The discovery in Uncle Thomas's study changed everything. For 3 days after Emma found the notebooks, Her uncle moved round his cottage like a man waking up from a very long sleep. He would pick up one of his old notebooks, read a few pages, then set it down with a look of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe he had written those words. Emma watched him carefully during those quiet days. She could see something stirring inside her uncle, like a seed that had been buried in dark soil for 20 years finally beginning to push toward the light on the fourth morning. Uncle Thomas found Emma reading in his garden under the old apple tree. "Emma," he said, sitting down beside her on the wooden bench he had built years ago, "I've been thinking about what you said, about my ideas not being silly." Emma closed her book and gave him her full attention. She could see something different in his eyes, not the sadness she had grown used to, but something that looked almost like excitement. "I want to try something," Uncle Thomas said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "The county has started something called the Rural Innovation Program. They're looking for practical solutions to help small communities, I think. I think maybe my water conservation project might be exactly what they need." Emma's face lit up like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Uncle Thomas, that's a wonderful idea." Together, they spent the next week organizing his notebooks and papers. Emma helped him type his ideas on his old computer, the one he usually only used for school reports. They worked at the kitchen table, surrounded by notebooks and sketches, turning 20 years of quiet thinking into a proper proposal. Uncle Thomas's hands shook slightly as he sealed the envelope containing his water conservation project. The brown envelope looked so ordinary, but Emma knew it contained something extraordinary. Her uncle's first step back into the world beyond his cottage walls. "We're really doing this," Uncle Thomas said, staring at the envelope as if it might disappear. Emma grinned at him, her 12-year-old confidence filling the spaces where his doubts still lingered. "We are, and it's going to be wonderful." They walked together to the village post office, where Mrs. Patterson weighed the envelope and stamped it with official red ink. Uncle Thomas watched it disappear into the mail bag with the same intensity he might have used to watch a bird take its first flight. The next week brought news that neither of them had expected. Emma was helping Uncle Thomas tend his vegetable garden when they heard a car pulling up the gravel driveway. A tall young man with kind eyes and a warm smile stepped out of a blue sedan. "Mr. Thomas," the man called out, "I'm Robert Clark. I was in your mathematics class about 15 years ago." Uncle Thomas straightened up from the tomato plants, soil still on his hands. Emma could see him trying to place the face with the memory of a young student. "Robert Clark," Uncle Thomas repeated slowly. Then his face changed completely. "Little Bobby Clark. The boy who used to build bridges out of pencils during lunch break." Robert laughed, the same bright laugh Emma imagined he'd had as a child. "That's me, though I'm not so little anymore. My goodness," Uncle Thomas said, wiping his hands on his garden apron. "What brings you back to our village?" Robert's expression grew serious and respectful. "Mr. Thomas, I heard about your innovation project through the village council. I'm an engineer now. I design sustainable systems for rural communities all across the county. I've been looking for someone with your practical wisdom to help with a major development project." Emma watched her uncle's face carefully. She could see surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope all mixing together. "You see," Robert continued, "I never forgot the way you taught us to think about problems. You always said that the best solutions come from understanding what people really need, not just what looks impressive on paper. I've been successful in my work, but I need someone who understands community the way you do." Uncle Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "What exactly are you asking, Robert?" "I'm asking if you would consider working with me as a consultant." Your ideas about water conservation and sustainable education could help thousands of people in rural areas just like this one. Before Uncle Thomas could fully process this surprising news, another car appeared on the village road. This one was smaller. A red car that Emma had never seen before. An elegant woman with silver hair and a gentle smile stepped out. Uncle Thomas's face went completely white. "Margaret," he whispered. The woman walked slowly up the garden path, her eyes never leaving Uncle Thomas's face. "Hello, Thomas," she said, her voice as warm and musical as Emma had imagined from her uncle's description. "I heard through the village network that you were finally ready to let the world see your talents," Margaret said with a gentle smile that seemed to hold 20 years of patience and understanding. "I always knew this day would come. I never stopped believing in you, even when you stopped believing in yourself." Emma felt like she was watching a miracle unfold in her uncle's garden. In the space of one afternoon, her uncle's quiet world had opened up to include possibilities he had never dared to imagine. Uncle Thomas looked at Robert, then at Margaret, then at Emma, for the first time in 20 years. He felt something he had almost forgotten existed. Hope. Not hope for a different past, but hope for a meaningful future. That evening, the village school board called with even more surprising news. They had heard about his innovation project and wanted him to lead a pilot program for innovative rural education. Everything was beginning to change, and Uncle Thomas realized that his years of quiet service had been preparing him for this moment all along. 6 months had passed like pages turning in a wonderful book. Emma returned to Uncle Thomas's cottage for another summer visit. But this time everything was different. The same fireflies danced round the porch, the same cricket songs filled the evening air, but her uncle had transformed in ways that seemed almost magical. Uncle Thomas's water conservation project had been implemented in 12 villages across the county. Emma had watched with pride as officials came to the cottage to discuss his designs, as newspaper reporters interviewed him about his innovative teaching methods, and as letters arrived daily from communities asking for his help. The quiet man, who had once believed his life was a failure, now spent his days traveling between villages, helping farmers build rainwater collection systems and teaching other educators how to make learning quality for their students. Education experts from the university had visited 3 times to study his methods, taking careful notes about how he used everyday objects to teach complex ideas. But perhaps the most beautiful change was Margaret. She had moved into the cottage next door, the one with the blue shutters and flower boxes. Emma loved watching her uncle and Margaret together. The way they laughed over morning tea, how they worked side by side in the garden, and the gentle way they looked at each other as if they were making up for 20 years of lost time. Margaret had brought her own magic to their small world. She was helping Uncle Thomas organize his ideas into a book that would help teachers everywhere. She had also started a Saturday reading program at the village library, something the community had needed for years, but never had anyone with the skills to begin. On Emma's last evening of summer vacate, Uncle Thomas asked her to sit with him one final time on the old wooden porch. The same bench where he had first shared his secret now felt like a place where miracles had begun. "Emma," he said, taking her hands in his weathered ones, "I need to tell you the real truth. The most important thing I've learned in all these months since you helped me see my life clearly." The fireflies were dancing again, just as they had that first evening when everything started to change. But now they seemed brighter somehow, as if they too were celebrating the transformation that had taken place in the cottage. Emma settled closer to her uncle, ready to listen with the same careful attention she had given him that night when his story began. "I spent 20 years believing I had taken the wrong path. that my life was a mistake and a waste of the gifts I had been given, Uncle Thomas said, his voice steady and clear. But now I understand something beautiful that I want you to remember. For your whole life, there are no wrong paths, only different destinations. A gentle breeze moved through the apple tree in the garden, rustling the leaves like whispered agreements. My years in this village, teaching these children, caring for this community, creating solutions in quiet moments, that wasn't my consolation prize for the life I didn't get to live. It was my calling. It was exactly what I was meant to do. Even though I couldn't see it at the time, Emma listened with her whole heart, understanding that this was one of those conversations she would remember forever. Uncle Thomas's voice was warm and certain now, completely different from the broken man who had shared his regrets 6 months earlier. The courage isn't always about leaving, sweetheart. Sometimes the greatest courage is in staying and making where you're more beautiful, every small act of kindness. Every student I helped understand mathematics. Every innovation I created during sleepless nights, they all mattered. They all led to this moment. He gestured toward the village lights twinkling in the distance, toward the cottage next door where Margaret was probably reading before bed. Toward the school where children would return in September eager to learn from their beloved teacher. Dreams don't always look the way we expect them to when we're young, Uncle Thomas continued, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the fireflies. Sometimes they grow slowly, like seeds planted in dark soil, ticking years to develop roots before they're strong enough to push toward the light. And when they finally bloom, they're more beautiful than we ever imagined because they've had time to grow deep and strong. Emma felt tears of happiness in her eyes. She thought about how her uncle's quiet years of teaching and creating had prepared him perfectly for the work he was doing now. How his deep understanding of his community made him exactly the right person to help other rural villagers. Uncle Thomas, she said softly, you've taught me that sometimes what looks like an ending is really just a pause before something wonderful begins. Uncle Thomas smiled. And Emma could see that this smile was different from any she had seen before. It reached all the way to his eyes and seemed to light up his entire face. Emma hugged her uncle tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of books and tea and garden soil that always surrounded him. So the story you whispered to me that first night, it has a happy ending. Uncle Thomas held her close, looking out at the village he had served faithfully for 20 years, thinking about the projects that would help thousands of people, remembering the love he had found with Margaret, and feeling grateful for the young niece who had helped him see his life clearly. No, my dear Emma, he said, his voice full of joy and possibility. It has a beautiful beginning. The fireflies continued their ancient dance round the porch as uncle and niece sat together in the peaceful evening, both understanding that sometimes the most important stories are the ones that teach us to see the magic in the life we're already living.